Today we're going to be learning Rosh Hashanah Daf Lamed. Today's daf is sponsored by Laura Schechter in loving memory of Silit Sivya Bat Moshe in honor of her first yahrzeit. She may have been my husband's grandmother in blood, but I loved her like my own. I know she would be proud of my continued learning of the daf, since she herself had the legacy of her grandmother teaching Torah weekly in her village in Czechia. I love you and miss you, Safta, and hope to honor your memory always. Okay, and reminder to everyone that the Siyum is on Sunday, November 14th. If you're in Israel, there's Siyums around the country. If you're abroad, some of the groups, I know, some of the Hadron groups are organizing local Siyumim, and as usual, we will be gathering for the Zoom Siyum with everyone on November 14th at 8 p.m. Israel time. Please register. Registration's up on our site. You can find it there. Okay, we're going to start now. We're going to have two statements here of Rav Huna about understanding this, what happened in when there was no temple anymore on Rosh Hashanah on Shabbat. If you remember, in the time of the temple, we said that if Rosh Hashanah fell on Shabbat, you would blow the shofar in the Mikdash, which there was a big machloket. Does the Mikdash mean all of Jerusalem? Which it definitely seems to be from the simple reading of the Sugya. Or some people thought maybe it was only in the temple. But that explanation is going to be a little bit challenging to our Gemara today. And then we saw that what happened. Rabban Yochanan said, we're going to do it anywhere where there's a beitin. And then there was this debate. Does that mean really anywhere where there's a beitin? Did he really mean only Yavne? Did he mean Yavne and something like Yavne? Okay, the Rif has a famous shita where he basically says, my beitin is like Yavne and we should blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, and so he did. He has a unique shita. Again, most people don't believe that. Most people think it's really Yavne and something like Yavne and not necessarily later courts. But in any case, we're going to start with the bottom of Kaften Mubet, which is the response of the rabbis in the Mishna to Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar said, it's only in Yavne, and they said, no. Echad Yavne ve'echad makom sheyesh bo beitin. Notice they said a place where there's a beitin. So what exactly does this mean? Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, ve'im beitin. Okay. The first reading is that Rav Huna said it on our Mishnah. The second reading is that he actually said it not regarding Rosh Hashanah, but something else, which we'll get to soon. Right now, we're going to be within the first reading. Both readings, he says something. The Gemara explains it, what he means by that, because it's not so clear what it means in beitin, with the court. What exactly does that mean? And then Rava is going to question it. So the im beitin, my the im beitin. So what does it mean to be with the beitin? In other words, it's not enough that you're in a place where there's a beitin, but you have to be with the court. So the simple reading is, b'fnei beitin, you have to be in front of the court. And that's what they assume Rav Huna means. La fuke shelo b'fnei beitin delo, that means you can't blow the shofar on Shabbat if you're not in front of the court. This fits in with Gzeira de Rabba, because Gzeira de Rabba says, that we saw yesterday, Gzeira de Rabba says, where were you going to carry the shofar 4 cubits in Reshut Rabim? And therefore he says, well, if you're with the court will make sure that you're not going to do it. Either you're going to be extra careful because you're right in front of the court, or the court will ensure that people keep the law and they don't start carrying their shofars around. So it makes sense. Mativ Rava. Rava now comes, and what we're going to have here, it's a bit of a confusing sugya. It's not actually so confusing, but what's confusing is there's a lot of lack of clarity, and there's certain inferences that Rava makes, which you kind of wonder, why are you assuming it means that? You could assume otherwise, and that's exactly what the Gemara is going to answer. So Mativ Rava. Rava says, I'm going to question you from our Mishnah. Ve'od zot hayta Yerushalayim yitera al Yavne. The Mishnah, if you remember the structure of the Mishnah had said, originally we used to do this, right? We used to blow the shofar in the temple, right? Or in Jerusalem, whatever it means. Then, when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, Rabban Yochanan and Zakkai made this takana that you could do it in Yavne or any place where there's a beit. Right? Actually, he said, the first meaning was, any place where there's a court, you can blow shofar. Rabbi Elazar said, only Yavne. To which the rabbi said, no, Yavne or anything similar. Then, which we dealt with yesterday, what's the difference between the three? Right? Why are there three opinions? It sounds like two, and then they distinguish between different types of courts. Then, it's a strange line. It says, Ve'od zot hayta Yerushalayim yitera al Yavne. Another difference between Yerushalayim and Yavne. Now, why is there another difference? There really wasn't a difference mentioned before. They didn't say there's a difference between Yavne and Yerushalayim. They just said it used to be in Jerusalem, then they moved it to Yavne, basically, right? Depending on how you read it, but something like that. So what's this? And additionally, there was a difference of Jerusalem and Yavne, which was what? And as an advantage to being in Jerusalem, which was Shekol Ir Shiro Avashamanu Kravav Yichola Lavo Tukin Ubiyavne Lo Ayu Tukin Ela Bebeitim Bilvad. In Yavne, they only did it in the court. In Jerusalem, you could do it in any place where you could even see or hear or get to Jerusalem. It was close enough, you could blow the shofar. So Rava says the following. Mai ve'od zot. What is this and additionally? It doesn't make any sense. If they want to just tell you the one difference it says in the Mishnah, zot bebaile, it should have said in this way, not and additionally in this way. Makes no sense. Ella, so he's going to suggest. So the first suggestion doesn't really work because of the word ve'od. Second suggestion we're going to see is going to reject also, and then he's going to assume, therefore, all we're left with is possibility number 3, process of illumination. And option number 3 is going to contradict Rav Huna. So he says, it must be, there's some other difference, and it's just not mentioned here. So what could that other difference be? Ella must. So now he's trying, again, like I said, he's using the Mishnah as a contradiction to Rav Huna, but he's really just grasping at straws. He's trying to figure out what could possibly the difference be. So let's suggest. Ella de Yerushalayim took in Yechidim. Maybe another difference was that in Jerusalem, individual people blew the shofar. Ubi Yavne ain't took in Yechidim. And in Yavne, only, a shliach tzibor would do it. Someone on behalf of everyone else, but not individuals. But that can't be because, and again, he's trying to figure out what other difference must there be. The Mishnah is obviously alluding to the fact that there's some other difference as well. But this can't be. In Yavne, they don't blow the shofar individuals. And individuals don't blow the shofar. We're going to see this twice in today's daf. When Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef came to Bavel, he told them, and the people in Babylonia didn't know this because they weren't there. But he says, I'm going to tell you what used to happen there. When they would finish the tkiyot, the shliach tzibur in Yavne, lo shama inish kol une mikol takuai diachidai. It sounds like a complicated sentence. What does it mean? No one would hear the sounds. Une is his ears. He wouldn't even be able to hear his own voice speaking almost, even though it's the sound of his ears. What it really means is you couldn't hear anything through your ears right when the shofar blowing stopped. Because mikal takoi dichidai, because of the shofar blast of all the individuals. Now, let's imagine the scene. The shliach tzibur finishes. We're talking about Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah. Okay, everybody pulls out from their bag a shofar and starts blowing shofar, and the sound is crazy, right? Can you imagine if everyone in shul pulled out their own shofar and started blowing the shofar? Be crazy, right? Obviously, this is one of these exaggerated stories. It probably didn't happen that every single person did it. It probably didn't happen. You couldn't hear anything, but likely, they're trying to say it was very loud because everyone started blowing their own shofar. The whole scene is very strange. Why is everyone blowing their own shofar? First of all, it's Rosh Hashanah Shabbos. You're not supposed to blow the shofar on Shabbos unless you really need to. So some of the commentaries talk about that because of there's different opinions about how the tkiyot are, and everybody kind of blew to be yotzei, like the same way we blow all these extra shofar blasts at the end of davening. So they say it's kind of similar to that, to fulfill other obligations, and it had to be obligations, otherwise they certainly wouldn't be able to do it on Shabbat. But however you read it, the point is that even individuals did it in Yavne as well. So you can't say that that's the difference. So if that's not the difference, what could it possibly be? Elulav, to Yerushalayim took in bein bizman beitin, ubein shelo bizman beitin, ubeyavne bizman beitin in, shelo bizman beitin lo. It must have to do with the time the beitin would sit. I don't know if this happens as much in America or abroad, I don't know. But in Israel, you have all these offices that are open from 8 to 12, and that's it, and they don't sit past 12. So apparently the court in Yavne was the same. Okay, Rashi says, Bein bizman beitin, ad shesh sha'ot shayu beitin yoshvin. The court would sit in the morning hours. That was it. So if you didn't catch them in the morning hours, you were done. So what it must mean is another difference is that in Yavne, you could only blow the shofar at the time the court was sitting, and not when the court was not in session anymore. So based on that, you would say, that's the difference. So again, Yerushalayim, you could do it even in the afternoon, but in Yavne, only in the time of the court. Now, according to this reading, again, this is what Rava assumes the difference must be. So if you assume that's the difference, so ha bizman beitin, mia tokin, afilu shelo b'fnei beitin. It seems like the issue then is time. But the issue is not in front of the court and not in front of the court. So therefore, it must be that it's even not in front of the court. To which the obvious answer is, lo. You were looking for a difference. Why don't we just say, this is the difference, the one that Rav Huna said. De'ilu b'Yerushalayim tokim bein b'fnei beitin, bein shelo b'fnei beitin. U'b'Yavne b'fnei beitin in shelo b'fnei beitin lo. No, you could say that the difference is exactly what Rav Huna said, that in Jerusalem you didn't need to be in front of the court, whereas in Yavne you had to be in front of the court. You couldn't not be in front of the court. I see a question about how did the court sit on Yantif? It's a good question, but I assume that the court did sit on Yantif, not probably to rule on cases like they did on a weekday, but specifically since in Yavne they blew the shofar in the court, so they adjourned the court in order to blow the shofar. That's what I would assume. I don't really know the answer to that question. It's a good question because you don't really think of the court sitting. But then I think what they mean is, and it's, if you're going to say time is a factor, which is what Rava tried to claim, then we're going to say, right, the way it is on a normal day, right, that's when we think of the beitin being open, right? And when the beitin's open, that's the time frame. We're going to use a time frame that comes from the world of the beitin. Whether or not they're open or not, I don't know if it matters. But the point is, it sort of does have to matter according to Rav Huna, because they have to be in front of the court. You can't just do it in your house. But some people say that Rav Huna, no, that's not what Rav Huna said. It's not where he said it. Rav Huna said, in beitin, we understood again, just to review, what he said was, it was talking about Rosh Hashanah on Shabbat, when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat. In Yavne, you can only blow the shofar if you're in front of a court. Okay, it doesn't have to be the court in Yavne. It could be any court, right? Because that's what we said. It's any beitin that's there. Again, depending on what you hold, which type of court do you need? Is it a court of 23 or is it a court that's established? But in any case, you have to be in front of a court. You can't just do it on your own. Rava tried to say that's not the issue. It's the issue of the time of day. You could really do it anywhere. It's based on your time of day. Okay, but Rav Huna didn't say that. But some people say that Rav Huna had nothing to do with, he wasn't talking when he said v'im beitim with the court. Number one, it's not going to mean that we're talking about Rosh Hashanah that falls on Shabbat. And number two, it's not going to mean what we thought it meant, in front of the court. Okay, so we're going to change two things about Rav Huna in this reading. Some people say that he said it on the following, and that the topic here is going to be the shofar blowing on the Yovel year, when Yom Kippur, remember, in the Yovel year, the jubilee year, you blow the shofar on Yom Kippur. If Yom Kippur fell on Shabbat, when do we blow the shofar? So some people said that Rav Huna said it about that. Dichtiv, as it says, B'Yom Kippurim ta'aviru shofar b'chol artzachem. It says in Yom Kippur, blow the shofar, right? Ta'aviru is not exactly the same word normally used, but it sounds like pass the shofar around, but meaning blow the shofar everywhere b'chol artzachem. So what do they derive from this verse? Melamed shekol yachiv v'yachiv chayav litkah. From here you learn that on the Yovel year, on Yom Kippur, every individual needs to blow the shofar. It's not clear, by the way, to me anyway. I didn't look up all the commentaries what this means. You actually have to blow the shofar or you have to hear the shofar. Okay? Amar Rav Huna, ve'im beitin. Now we're assuming that we're talking about on Shabbat again. And he says it's in beitin, okay, with the court. So now, my ve'im beitin, what does it mean? Now, if you're going to say it's every individual, you can't possibly say, like we said before, that it's in front of the beitin. Not everyone's going to be able to appear in front of a court. So it must be bisman beitin. It must be during the time that the beitin sits. And then, now this is like the mirror of the previous thing. That was what Rava tried to say it was. And now it's Rav Huna saying that. La fuke shelo bisman beitin dilo. So everybody needs to blow in an individual way, but it has to be done in the morning hours. Because that's the time that the beitin sits. Mativ Rava now comes in questions from a different source. So again, it's the parallel sugya or mirror image sugya. Rava is going to question this differently now. Tkiyat Rosh Hashanah v'yovel dochet haShabbat b'gvulin ish ubeito. Tkiyat shofar, this is a Tanaitic source. Tkiyat shofar on Rosh Hashanah and the Yovel year override Shabbat outside of Israel. Ish ubeito. A man, now normally beito is his wife. So the Gemara is going to say, my ishu beito. What does it mean, a man and his wife? Ilema ish v'ishto itatami machayva. If you're going to say a man and his wife, but a woman's not obligated in tkiyat shofar. I told you we get to this today. How do we know this? Because it's a time-bound positive commandment. Right? It's got clearly a time to do it on a particular day, during the day. So therefore, it's time-bound and women are exempt. So it can't mean ish ubeito, again, as I told you yesterday, but the minhag became that women took upon themselves to catch shofar, and it turned into a type of obligation for them. And therefore, many women are very careful to keep it as an obligation. It's one of those cases where minhag sometimes overrides halacha. But at this point, that wasn't what was happening, and therefore they say it can't possibly be ish ubeito, a man and his wife, and lulav ish bibeito, a man in his house. Okay? Now, if you say in his house, it sounds like vafilu shelo b'zman beitin. Once you say every person in their house, it sounds like it doesn't really have much limitation on it. It sounds like, right, number one, it obviously doesn't have to be in front of the beitin, and number two, we're going to assume it doesn't have to be b'zman beitin. Okay, again, that's an assumption Rava makes. It's not a clear assumption. You could read it otherwise, because the issue is location and the issue is not time. It could be it's limited by time. But right now, Rava wants to suggest the fact that it says ish bebeito seems to indicate anyone can do it whenever they want. Okay, obviously on that day, but whenever they want on that day. So, and that's against Rav Huna, who said it has to be b'zman beitin. To which Rav Huna can answer, lo olam b'zman beitin. No. Right? That was arbitrary that you said that. It talked about location. It didn't talk about time. It could be ish bebeito, but within a certain time frame, only in the morning. So that was the first question against the second reading of Rav Huna. Now we're going to have a second question against the reading of Rav Huna here, that it's talking about Yovel, and it means time. Mativ Rav Sheshet. Now we're going to see a Mishna that we already learned. Shaveh hayovel l'Rosh Hashanah l'tkiyahu l'brachot. The shofar, right? The shofar and the brachot in the Yovel year on Yom Kippur are the same as Rosh Hashanah. So now, Ella, except what? Should be Yovel Tokim. No, this is not our Mishnah, okay? The truth is, I said it's our Mishnah. It's the same line from our Mishnah, but the continuation, right, I don't believe that was in our Mishnah, unless I'm not remembering correctly, but Ella should be Yovel Tokim bein bebeitin sheketshubo at HaChodesh, ubein bebeitin shelo ketshubo at HaChodesh. V'chol yachid v'yachid chayav litkoa. What's the difference between them? In the Yovel, they're Tokim, whether it's a court that sanctified the new moon, or whether it's not a court that sanctified the new moon. In other words, any court will do. But when it comes, right, and kol yachid v'yachid chayav litkoa, and every individual needs to blow the shofar. But on Rosh Hashanah, again, this is all on Shabbat, when it comes out on Shabbat. On Rosh Hashanah, lo ayu tokim ela bebeitin sheketshubo at HaChodesh. They wouldn't use just any court. It had to be a court. Again, this is another criteria. It'd have to be a court that could sanctify the new moon. Ve'en kol yachid v'yachid chayav litkoa. And not every individual needs to blow. Now the Gemara is going to say, but wait a minute. My ein kol yachid v'yachid chayav litkoa. What do you mean they don't all have to blow the shofar? Ilema to be yovel tokin yachidin, but Rosh Hashanah ein tokin yachidin. If you want to say individuals can't blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, shachali op Shabbat. But we already know. V'haki ata Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef amal. We already quoted this earlier in today's daf. He came and said that what? Ki ava Messiah shlicha ditzibor tzkiata b'Yavne lo shama inish kol une mikal takoed yachidai. The noise was so loud of every individual blowing the shofar. So it can't possibly be that in the Yovel year, that what that braita means is that in Rosh Hashanah, individuals don't need to blow the shofar. So therefore, what must it mean? Here comes the question on Rav Huna. And lulav, does it not mean de ilu beyovel tokim bein b'zman beitin bein shelo b'zman beitin? B'Rosh Hashanah b'zman beitin in shelo b'zman beitin lo. It's interesting that they say this, but if you take the words kol yachid v'yachid chayav litkoa, would it mean and Rosh Hashanah not? It doesn't mean they're chayav or not chayav. It means they're limited in time. When it says ein kol yachid v'yachid, you can't blow the shofar anytime you want. That's really what it means. Okay, it has to be within a certain time frame. As opposed to the Yovel year, which doesn't have to be in any time frame. Now that goes exactly against what Rav Huna said. Rav Huna said in the Yovel year, when you blow the shofar on Shabbat, it can only be in the time the court operates in the morning hours. And this seems to indicate, no, that's only true for Rosh Hashanah, not for Yovel. So here's our question. Katani mihat. So now you could read, again, it's reading this into the braita. The braita doesn't actually say this, but Yovel bein b'zman beitin bein shelo b'zman beitin. It sounds like Yovel is not limited in time against Rav Huna. To which the Gemara says, lo olam b'zman beitin. No, that's not what it meant. It meant, right, even Yovel has to be within a time frame. It wasn't relating to that issue at all. V'hachi katani, this is what it means. When it said individuals, yes, in Yovel, and not in Rosh Hashanah, what it meant was, B'Yovel, Bizman Beitin, Tokim, Bein Bifnei Beitin, Bein Shalo Bifnei Beitin. Individuals means you don't have to be, you don't have to be in front of the court. And Rosh Hashanah took in when it said Rosh Hashanah is not for individuals, what it meant is it's not for individuals not near the court, not in front of the court. Right? So Rosh Hashanah took in Bizman Beitin Ubifnei Beitin. You need both. In other words, both need Bizman, but Rosh Hashanah needs also Bifnei, and Yom Kippur on the Yovel year doesn't need Bifnei Beitin. And that's the difference between them. And then we're left with, you can still explain Rav Huna as saying that Zman is a criteria even for the Yovel year. And that his statement of Im Beitim meant in the time of the court, and it was talking about Yovel, and it wasn't talking about our Mishna at all. Itmar Nami, some people say, it was also said, which is a proof to what we just read, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Gamda, Amar Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul, Amar Rabbi. They all said it, passed it down from the name of Rabbi. Ein tokin ala kol zman shebeitin yoshvin. You can only blow the shofar in the time that the court is sitting. So that proves exactly what that second reading of Rav Huna. It has to be when the court is sitting. By Rabbi Zeira, here's a classic Gemara question. Nin arula amod velo amdu. There's a few different interpretations of what this means. We'll go with Rashi. Rashi says, if you look at the last Rashi before the word Mishna, it's much higher up on the daf. Ne'ekrumi moshavam kedei la'amod v'leilech. They got up, ready to leave, but they didn't yet leave. Okay, they kind of moved their legs, ready to leave. Okay, this happened to me on Friday. I went to a store. I needed something. I realized I ran out of something in the house. I went to the store. It was 5 minutes to 2. I assumed the store was closed at 2. I see the store's open. I say, great. And then basically I walk into the store and they say, sorry, we're already closed. I said, what do you mean you're closed? I see you're open. I said, well, we closed all the registers already. Sorry, there's no one who can take you. I said, just one thing? They said, no, we're closed. So I think it's like that, right? Where you're in the court, the judges are still there, but they've basically finished their cases. Okay, they're basically done, ready to go. So, Mahu, you say, Beitin Yoshvin B'inam V'ha'ika, right? They're still sitting, right? In fact, what was funny, and it's a real good comparison, there were people still sitting in the register counters. It's not like they weren't there. They were sitting there. But, obviously they closed the registers. Hard to open that again. But the point is, they were sitting there. So the judges are sitting. And do you need just sitting, technically? Or, Odilmazman Beitin B'inam V'leiko. Do you need the time where they're working and they're not working anymore? Okay, it's beyond the time that they were supposed to be working. So the answer is Teku. We don't know the answer. So we asked a question, right? What would be the case? Would that be considered sitting or not? And we don't really have an answer. Okay, going back to the Mishnah and this line. So we gave 4 things. Any place that sees, right? Any city that sees, hears, is close, and can come. Blow the shofar. So they're now going to darshan. What does each one come to exclude? Ro'ah prat liyoshevet benachal. If it's in the valley or by sitting next to like a stream, then you can't really see the city because you're too low down. Shomat prat liyoshevet berosh hahar. If you're at a mountain, you can see the city, but you can't hear it because you're so far away height-wise that you won't be able to hear anything. Krova prat liyoshevet chutz l'tchum. If you're close, that comes to exclude someone. What does it mean close? Well, our usual definitions of tchum, 2,000 cubits, is what's considered within, right, a close range. What if you're close, you can see, you can hear everything, but you're within 2,000 cubits, but there's a river in the middle and you can't cross it. So that would be you wouldn't be able to come. All those people are excluded from the law that you wouldn't blow the shofar there if it was Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah. Okay, now we're going to get to some Mishnayot that we've already learned. We saw this in Masechet Sukkah. Barishona, since we already started with takanot Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, we're now going to see other takanot, because you're going to see these takanot, each one kind of, they split into categories, and there's a bunch more of them that aren't listed here. Some are done, right, because of changes. Okay, we have to move with the changes, or some, right, we have to establish Yavne as the center. We have to remember, we're going to see lulav, that they once did lulav for 7 days, even though now, right, normally outside the temple, they only did it 1 day. We want to remember that. The next one, we're going to worry that maybe the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt and people will get confused by the laws. There's all different gzerot or institutions that he instituted for all different kinds of reasons. So originally lulav was taken 7 days in the temple, But b'midina yom echad, because it says ulekachtem lachem b'yom harishon, on the first day. So outside the temple, people only took it the first day, right? Then it says in the end of that pasuk something like, and you should rejoice before God 7 days. So before God 7 days, but individuals only 1 day. Mishacharav beit hamikdash, but once the beit hamikdash was destroyed, hitkim Rabban Yochanan and Zakkai shei lulav nital b'midina shiva zecher lemikdash. He didn't want people to forget that there was this concept of 7 days in the mikdash. And this is also actually similar to the next one, which is maybe the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt and people won't remember. So he instituted, we're going to take it 7 days outside the temple, and that's why we do what we do. Another thing he did was that the Yom Hanef will be forbidden the entire day to eat from the new grains. What are we talking about? The day after the first day of Pesach was called Yom Hanef. It was the day they would bring the Korban Omer. In the time of the temple, it would be forbidden to eat until you brought the Korban Omer. Once you brought the Korban Omer, it permitted all the new grains. Now that there's no temple, we're going to forbid it all day long. We're going to have to understand why that is, and that's what the Gemara will do. So the first question is, Minal and Davdin on Zecher L'Mikdash. Where do we know that there's this concept of Zecher L'Mikdash, to remember? Tamar Kra, the pasuk says, Ki e'aleh arucha lach u'mimakotayach erpa'echnu Hashem. It's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Okay, when I will come a day where I will fix all the disasters that happen. Ki nidacha karulach, because they called you nidacha. You were kind of set. What's the word? Nidach, like put off to the side, pushed off. Tzion he. This is Tzion doresh ein la. There's no one. Thank you, outcast. There's no one who's searching for you, right? No one's kind of out there going out to bat for you. Or no one's even seeking it. So what do you learn from this pasuk? Michlal debaya drisha. From here, we need to be wanting to go back to the mikdash. We need to be doing things to remind us of the mikdash all the time, right? You could say that nowadays it's very obvious, this issue, because then at least they were close to the time of the mikdash, feeling like it was going to be rebuilt any day. Nowadays, it's much harder to have that feeling of, the beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt tomorrow, right? It seems, we say it, but it's very hard to believe because it's something that's so distant from us. So we're supposed to be always thinking about the mikdash. That's why we do all sorts of things in our lives that are zecher l'mikdash, right? Like breaking a glass at a wedding, things like that. V'shehei Yom Hanef kulo asur. So my time, what's the reason for this Yom Hanef, this day of waving, should be all entirely forbidden? Mehera yibaneh beit HaMikdash. Soon the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt. That was right. They believed, like we say, right? We hope it soon will be rebuilt. And you have to remember, in those days, all the more so, because they really were hoping immediately it would be rebuilt. They'll say, didn't we? Now, the issue is that when the Omer is around, Korban Omer you can do, so you have to wait till it's sacrificed. If not, then you can already do it from the morning. So, if we allow it from the morning, from as soon as the sun starts rising, then right when the east becomes light, then what will they say? When they rebuild the temple, people will think, Behiyir Mizrach, as soon as the light comes up in the morning, they'll remember last year, that's what we did, so this year as well. So Hashadi'ika Omer Matir. So then they say, right, they'll think that, but now that there's an Omer, it's really the Omer that's Matir and not the morning, and that's why he didn't want to allow people to eat the Omer in the morning, even though technically speaking, halachically they could. Now the Gemara asked, Mivna Emat. You might remember we had this exact sugya in Sukkah. When exactly are we concerned that it's going to be rebuilt? If you're going to say maybe it'll be rebuilt on that day, on the 16th, well, Harehi Ir Mizrachi Tir. If it was going to be built that day, when the morning came, it wasn't rebuilt, which means as soon as the morning came up, it's permitted. You don't have to wait because there was no temple in the morning. Ela di Yavne b'chamesh sal. Maybe it was built on the day before, b'chamesh sal. Mechatzot yom ulahalan lishtere. But if you're going to say that, then it should be from midday. Why midday? Okay, first of all, before we even move on, how could it be built on the 15th? It's Chag. You don't build on Chag. So, if you remember, we saw this opinion. Rashi, I think it's Rashi who says it. Yeah, Binyan ha'atid lavo b'idei shamayim hi. The future Beit HaMikdash is going to be built by the heavens, and therefore it could theoretically come down on the day of Pesach. Okay, on a holiday. It's not like we're going to build it ourselves. It's a whole interesting opinion in of itself, right? That magically it will kind of fall from the heavens. Okay, we're going to leave that point aside. and move on. But anyway, if you say the 15th, so it should be allowed from midday. Why? It says in the Mishna, anyone who lives farther away, now you were living in the time of the temple, let's say, and you weren't living near the temple, so you have no idea what time they brought the Omer. At what point could you eat your new grains? You could eat them, the new crop, from midday. Why? Because there's a court here. It's not really the court, it's the Kohanim. We assume the Kohanim do their job on time, and by midday, for sure, they've done the Korban Omer. So if the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt on the 15th, then the assumption is on the 16th it'll be permitted once midday hits. So if now there's no temple, we're going to make it more strict. It doesn't make any sense. As long as it's midday, it should be fine. So why did he say the whole day is forbidden? So we're going to have two answers for this. Lo nitzracha, the first answer is very small chance of this happening, but lo nitzracha eladi ibane b'chamesav samuch l'shkiat hachama inami divnei b'lelia. Either it'll be built at the very end of the 15th or the beginning of the 16th, and then they'll have to start going into the fields, cutting the grains, bringing them into the temple, right? They have to turn them into a very fine flour. By the time they do all of the processes, it'll be late in the day, and there's a chance that if it will be rebuilt just in that very small window, in the 15th and the 16th. By the way, the other options were the 15th or any time before the 15th, right? It obviously doesn't mean either the 15th or the 16th. The 16th, it'd already be permitted from the morning, because in the morning there was no temple. Anything before that, it should already be permitted by midday. So therefore, the only chance that the reason why you have to forbid this entire Yom Hanef is because of the off chance it will be rebuilt that night, and then they wouldn't have had enough time during the day to get the Korban Omer done until the late afternoon. That's why he forbade it all day. That's a very rare occurrence that it would be rebuilt right then. Amar Rav Yitzchak, here's a different answer. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai b'shitat Rabbi Yehuda amara. He was just holding like Rabbi Yehuda, who held. Ta'amar ad etzem hayom hazeh. The verse reads, "V'lechem v'kali v'karmel lo tochlu ad etzem hayom hazeh." This is talking about the new crop. Don't eat until etzem hayom hazeh, which usually means midday. Ad aviachem et korban aloechem, until you bring the korban. Now, normally we say, when there's a time of the temple, it's ad aviachem. If not, then you could do it ad etzem hayom hazeh. So what's ad etzem hayom hazeh? He says, "V'kasavar ad v'ad bichlal." Ad v'ad bichlal means it includes everything. So because it includes everything, we're going to say, until the middle of the day really means until and including the middle of the day. And when does the middle of the day end? At the end of the day. It's a bit of a unique interpretation also, but that's what he holds. So he understands that etzem hayom hazeh means until the end of the day. So now, we're going to say, you must hold like Rabbi Yehuda. That's option number 2. So the Gemara questions this by saying, Umi savarla kavate, but how could you say he holds like Rabbi Yehuda? We know that he disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda. Yet they have a disagreement. It's none. Mishacharav beit HaMikdash. Once the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, hitkin Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai sheyom hanef kulo asur. That's what we just said. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says to him, what are you coming making this takana from the rabbis? Halomana Torah asur. What do you mean? Already in the Torah it says it's forbidden. Dichtiv ad etzem hayom hazeh. So they clearly disagree, because Rabbi Yehuda says, what are you talking about? You made this takana as if like you came and taught something new. It says so in the Torah, exactly what you said. Ad and ad va'ad bichlal is to the end of the day. So they disagree. So how could you possibly say that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai holds like Rabbi Yehuda? Now, if you notice from their disagreement, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai doesn't respond to Rabbi Yehuda. It's a one-sided argument. Rabbi Yehuda comes and disagrees with Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. So the Gemara says, Hatam Rabbi Yehuda hu dekatai. It was Rabbi Yehuda who mistakenly misunderstood Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. And then you can explain it the way Rav Nachman said, which is, Iu savar Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai midrabanan kamar, velohi midoraita kamar. He thought that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted this rabbinic change. Okay, I'm a rabbi, I'm saying we're going to change things, and we're going to make it forbidden all day. And comes Rabbi Yehuda and says, what are you talking about? It says so in the Torah. But that's not really true. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was actually going by the Torah law. Okay, now, what's the problem with this? Vaha hitkin katane, but it says Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai hitkin. Hitkin means he made a takana. He instituted something new. It's always something new, rabbinic. That's usually what it means. So how could you possibly say he was saying this is by Torah law? So, exactly what you're saying, Gita, which is, my hitkin, da rashvi hitkin. What does it mean, hitkin? It means he looked at the Torah, he read the verse, he darshaned it, he said, oh, look, we're now in a new scenario. There's no more temple anymore. Let's go back to the verses, try to understand them in light of our new situation. Oh, it gives you two possibilities, either ad etzem hayom hazeh or until we bring the korban. Right? It doesn't have to be read that way, by the way. And he says, that's how we read the verse. And ad means ad v'ad bichlal, including the entire day. And therefore, I'm going to come and say, what the Torah is saying about our new situation is that we have to wait all day. And that's what he did. And then you could explain him according to Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda just misunderstood him. It wasn't like they were really having an argument. It was that Rabbi Yehuda thought that he was saying something else than what he was really saying. So we have two ways to understand Rabban Yochanan and Zakkai, which is interesting because one is that he really made something new, and the other is he wasn't innovating anything. He was just reading the verses and translating them, applying them to his time. Both are interesting, right? But it's different. New Mishna. Barishona, we also have seen this Mishnah before. Hayu makablim edut hachodesh kol hayom. Okay, remember in beit, we had a whole thing about Rosh Hashanah and how they determine the day, etc. So we're going to learn this again. In the beginning, which makes sense because we're in Rosh Hashanah now, in the beginning they would accept witnesses all day long. This seems to be talking about Rosh Hashanah, although there are some that think we're talking about Rosh Chodesh in general. They would accept witnesses all day long. Pa'am achat, one time, what happened? Nishtuhu aidim ilavo, the aidim didn't show up in time. V'nitkalkalu aleviyim bashir. And what happened? So, by the way, some people say nishtuhu milavo, they came late. Sounds like they were delayed by someone else, like the Romans or someone delayed them from getting to the temple on time. And the Leviyim messed up the shear. Okay, we're going to have to see what exactly did they mess up and how did they mess up. But the point is that if it was Rosh Hashanah, there was a special shear, you would say, and they didn't say that special shear for Rosh Hashanah, and it was too late at that point. When they came after mincha, it was too late. They would bring it with the sacrifices, and it was too late. Now, some people say, what about the sacrifices? Did they mess up the sacrifices? So some people say, yeah, what it means is they messed up the sacrifices. They didn't do the sacrifice for Rosh Hashanah, and it was too late to do them. And they messed up the shear additionally. Some people say, no, they brought the sacrifices al t'nai, as we've seen this many, many times, on condition. If it's Rosh Hashanah, this is for Rosh Hashanah. If not, it's voluntary offerings that we're bringing. But the shear they couldn't do because the shear is specific to that day. And you only say it if it's Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, they were very upset that nitzkakalu alevim bashir. And therefore, hitzkinu shalayu makablim el ada mincha. So from then on, they said, we only accept witnesses till mincha. We're not going to accept witnesses beyond mincha time because it will mess up our shear. Now, what's the problem, though? Okay, what happened? In general, they would keep that day as if it was Rosh Hashanah, meaning they wouldn't do any work that day. Comes mincha time, witnesses don't come. You know at this point, witnesses can't come because they already said we're not going to accept witnesses. So theoretically, you would say, oh, this must be the 30th day of Elul. And tomorrow is going to be Rosh Hashanah. We know that for sure. So let's just do whatever we want. Now we could do malacha, all that. In order to avoid that, because if they do that, what's going to happen? Next year, they'll say, oh, I'm not going to start with no malacha, because look what happened last year. We spent the whole day not doing malacha, and it turned out it wasn't even yantiv, and I'm not going to take that seriously this year. So therefore, nohagim, they said, listen, no matter, because of that, nohagim, otoyam kodesh ulam machar kodesh. So therefore, they said, we're going to keep this day sanctified and the next day sanctified. Meaning, Rosh Hashanah is going to be 2 days no matter what. Again, unless, this is only if witnesses didn't come the first day. If witnesses come the first day, then only the first day is going to be Rosh Hashanah. But if witnesses don't come at any point in the first day, right, we're going to basically say these 2 days are going to be sanctified no matter what, and that way people will take it seriously. But again, in those days, different from nowadays, again, we went through all this in Beitza, if it ended up being 2 days because they didn't sanctify, because the witnesses didn't come till mincha, even if witnesses came after mincha, they only sanctified the new moon the next day, and Rosh Hashanah would then be the 30th day of Elul and the first day of Tishrei. Whereas nowadays, because of this takana, we do 2 days to remember that sometimes it was 2 days. But we know already our calendar has Rosh Hashanah being, right, that the first day of Rosh Hashanah is the first day of Rosh Hashanah, Aleph Tishrei. So Bet Tishrei is just an extra day. It's not like 2 days of Rosh Chodesh, which end up the 30th day and the first day. Okay, that's why it ends up different. Mishachara beit HaMikdash, once the beit HaMikdash was destroyed, Hitkim Rabban Yochanan and Zakkai Makablim Edut HaChodesh Kol Hayom. He said, listen, this whole thing is irrelevant anymore, is at this point. Okay, this isn't Zecher the Mikdash. This is, we're reverting back to what it originally was. We'd rather go by truth. If the witnesses come, then we know there was a new moon. This should be sanctified as Rosh Hashanah, and you don't need the next day, even though, right, there is no shir anymore. Okay, even though we do say a shir shel yom, but it doesn't have the significance of the Levites singing the shir in the temple. We don't have that issue. We're going to revert back to what it was before. So now the Gemara wants to know, Ma kilkul kikalu aleviyim b'shir. What was the mess up? So hachatir gamu, here they translated, which means in Babylonia they said shalom rushira kol ikal. They didn't do a song at all that day. In other words, they didn't want to do the song of a Yom Chol because maybe it's Rosh Hashanah. So they waited in case it's Rosh Hashanah. But by the time they found out it was Rosh Hashanah, it was too late to do the shir. And therefore, they didn't do the shir at all. Rabbi Zeira Amar, what are you talking about? When it came to the afternoon and no witnesses had come, they said it must be a weekday. And then they did the shir of Chol in the afternoon. They did the wrong shir. This is like a good question in terms of when you mess something up. Is it worse to say the wrong thing, or is it worse to not have said anything at all? Right? The Bavlim said the bad thing was that they didn't say anything at all. Rabbi Zeira says, no, that wouldn't be so bad. It's worse if you say the wrong thing. Musaf, they clearly didn't say, they didn't do Musaf. They didn't do the Korban. Or if they did the Korban as the Safek, maybe, then they did the Korban, right? They did it without the Shir, because it was, maybe this is a weekday, and then we're just giving a voluntary, or maybe it's Rosh Hashanah. The mincha is the issue, because at mincha and shacharit, they would always say a shir. And if they would say the shir that matched that day. So according to, right, what we're going to assume is in the morning, they didn't say a shir at all. And in the afternoon, if they figured it was a Yom Chol, then they would say the shir of Chol. Okay, whereas according to the Babylonians, they just didn't say a shir that day because they didn't want to mess it up and say the wrong thing, right? So they just didn't say anything. And that was their mess up, because in the end, they were supposed to have said the shir of Rosh Hashanah. So now we're going to have two questions against the Babylonians, who said they didn't say a shir at all. Amalo Rabbi Zeira la'ava b'rei, says to his son Ava, he says, Puk t'nei lehu, go to the Babylonians and bring them the following braita to prove that they're wrong. Remember, Rabbi Zeira went back and forth. So he, is in Babylonia, says to his son, go tell them the following. Hitzkinu shelo yu makablim edura chodesh, ela kadei sheyeh shehu b'yom la'akriv t'midin u'musafim b'niskehem v'lomar shira shelo b'shibush. They instituted they wouldn't accept witnesses unless there was enough time to bring all the tamid sacrifices. They mean obviously the afternoon ones, and the musaf, and all the extra things that go along with them, the libations, and they'd be able to say the shira without messing it up. Now, what does it mean without messing it up? So Rabbi Zeira says, they could say the shira without messing it up. Sounds like they said a shira of chol, and the point is there has to be enough time so that they don't say the wrong one. Sounds like they actually said something. But if you want to say loam or klal, my shibushika, that's not a mess that they messed up the shir. No, you would just say so that they would say the shira at all. So kevan de loam or klal and l'chashibush gadol nizeh. No, the Babylonians could answer and say no. Since they didn't say a shir at all, that's the biggest shibush. Again, this is just a matter of perspective. Is that a mess up or not? Right? Is it worse? The Babylonians say it's much worse to have not said any song at all. And that's how they understand the word shibush, mess up. Mati Rav Huna. So the first question wasn't really such a strong question. Next one. Tamid shel Rosh Hashanah shacharit karev kilchato. So what do you do? If you bring the Tamid shel Rosh Hashanah, you bring it normally in the morning, and you don't say a shir, it sounds like. B'musaf ma omer. In Musaf on Rosh Hashanah, if you find out it's Rosh Hashanah on the first day, you say, Hariu le'Elohim uzenu, Hariu le'Elohei Yaakov. If you notice, this all has to do with singing to God, Hariu, like shofar and all that. And happens to be the mizmor that we say on every Thursday. And they also said it on Thursdays, you'll see that in a minute. But they would also say it on Rosh Hashanah with the Musaf sacrifices. B'mincha mahu omer, what would he say in mincha? Kol Hashem yachil midbar, what we say Friday night, right? Kol Hashem yachil midbar, because kol, again, the voice of the shofar. All the shirim had to do, obviously, with the shofar. Ubizman shachal Rosh Hashanah liyot b'chamishi b'Shabbat. What do you do if it comes out on Thursday? And the one you're supposed to say in Musaf is the one you're normally supposed to say on that day in the morning. So what do? Shashira shelo harninu l'Elohim uzenu, right? Because on Thursdays that's what you say. Lo haya omer b'shacharit harninu mipnei shachozer b'kofel et haperek. Because you're going to say musaf in the afternoon, harninu, you don't say harninu in the morning because we don't want you to say the same shir twice. So elama omer, what do you say? Hasiroti mishsevel shechmo, which is a reference to Yosef getting out of Edupi Hosif Samo, we learned this already. Reference to Yosef getting out of jail, which also has to do with Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, sorry. But what's weird about this is from the middle of that same chapter of Tehillim. But the point is, at least you don't start it in the same place. So you say them from the middle of it, you say toward the end of it. And then in the afternoon, you start from the beginning, or in the Musaf, which would be maybe later in the morning. You would start from the beginning. If the witnesses came after the Tamid Shel Shachar, and you didn't know that it was Rosh Hashanah at the time, to switch the shir in the morning, so what do? You already said the shir in the morning of Harninu. Omer Harninu Alpha Pisha Chazer V'Kofel Teperek. When it comes to Musaf, you say it twice. Okay, and we'd rather avoid saying it twice. But if you didn't know it was Rosh Hashanah yet, because the witnesses hadn't come, and you said it twice, okay, you said it twice. So now, why is this a question against the Babylonians, who thought that they didn't say the shira at all? Because it says, if you're going to say anytime they were in doubt, they weren't sure yet, right? Obviously they all knew it could potentially be Rosh Hashanah when they said the shira in the morning. If you're going to say anytime they were in doubt, Amrinan Shira Dechol, right? Hainut Ka'amar, Amrova Koflo, right? They obviously said the shira of Chol in the morning. That proves Rabbi Zeira, that they messed up and said the regular weekday shir and not the one for Rosh Hashanah. If you said they didn't know it was going to be Rosh Hashanah or not, they were in doubt, they wouldn't say a shira at all, then they wouldn't have said the shir Harninu in the morning, and there wouldn't be any duplication at all. So what do they answer? We'll go into tomorrow's daf just to give you the answer here. Shane hatam de shira de yomehu. This is different on a Thursday because it's not, you won't say the wrong shir, you'll just end up saying it twice, but it's the appropriate shir for that day, right? It's almost like you got the bingo, right? You won the lottery because you were able to say the shir even though you're not sure it's Rosh Hashanah, because at least if you say it wrong, at least you'll have said the right shir anyway for Rosh Hashanah. So, and the only issue you've said it twice because you're going to say it in mincha as well. But that's only on Thursdays. On other days, you don't say it at all, and that supports the Babylonians. So they tried to bring this as a question against them. In the end, they answered the question, and almost it seems like it proves the Babylonians, because earlier in the braita, it seemed to say you weren't saying any shir in the morning at all. Anyway, we'll leave you with that, and we will continue with this tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.